Welcome to the second part of the second episode of Analyzing Evil. In this video, we'll be going over possibly the most important character of this series, Ganondorf. While demise is the beginning of the character chronologically and important in his own right, we saw in the last video that there really isn't too much to go off of to establish a detailed persona for him. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, you can do so by clicking here now. Ganondorf, however, is a much more complex character, and appears in many more entries in the Legend of Zelda franchise. While our next episode will be going over the final form of this character, Ganon, much of the character of Ganon can be understood through Ganondorf. In this video, we'll first explore Ganondorf as he appears in the Ocarina of Time, which is his first appearance in the official Legend of Zelda timeline. At the end of this game is where the timeline splits 3 different ways: the defeated timeline, the child timeline, and the adult timeline. Ganondorf does not appear in the defeated timeline, as with his victory he is able to transform himself fully into Ganon, so we won't be touching on that part of the timeline in this video. First, we'll be starting off with the child timeline, as the Ganondorf in this timeline is directly related to the Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time. In the child timeline, Link goes back in time after he defeats Ganondorf as an adult, and warns the King of Hyrule of Ganondorf's plot, who then has him executed. He is eventually resurrected in this timeline and returns in Twilight Princess. After he is defeated in this game, later on he is resurrected once again and returns in Four Swords Adventure. We'll be going over these games in order after Ocarina of Time. In the adult timeline, he appears in only one game, that being Wind Waker. This will be our last stop before we go over all the details about each of his appearances to give us a summary of the character as a whole. Now, please sit back and enjoy the second part of our series on Ganon, the King of Evil, Ganondorf. Ocarina of Time is the first physical appearance of Ganondorf. His name is mentioned in A Link to the Past, however he never actually appears in that game. It's in Ocarina of Time where we first establish his origins. Ganondorf is born of the Gerudo, a tribe of thieves who live in the desert in the western part of Hyrule. Once every 100 years, a male is born among the Gerudo, and that man, by birthright, is given the title of King of the Gerudo. This time around, that Gerudo male is Ganondorf. Before he was even born, Ganondorf was already destined for a position in the world that would undoubtedly shape his personality. He was born special, a one-of-a-kind being only born every 100 years. This had to have played a role in developing him into the King of Evil, coupled with the fact that Ganondorf is also the reincarnation of Demise's hatred, as we learned in the last video. It's easy to see how these things could affect his psyche. Ganondorf also possesses magical abilities, and is called a sorcerer and a warlock. Perhaps the powers he has are a direct result of the influence of Demise. However, this particular aspect of Ganondorf is not expanded upon much in the game. But knowing this, those powers surely only added to his feelings of superiority when compared to other lesser beings. As a child, we can assume that he was treated as a king, and thus developed into an adult with the attitude of a king. Although he is a king, like the King of Hyrule, his development was surely marred by the intense feeling of hatred he felt within him, due to the influence of Demise. As an adult, we can see these influences manifest in the actions he takes and in his personality. As Ganondorf in the beginning is the King of Thieves, it is not below him to steal what he wants. Lying comes easy to him as well, as in the beginning of the game, he feigns loyalty to the King of Hyrule in order to earn his trust and get closer to the royal family, who holds one of the keys to opening the Door of Time. When Link is a child, he attempts to gain these keys in several different ways. The first is his attempt to steal the research that was made on controlling time with the tones of ocarinas made by the composer brothers of Kakariko Village, Sharp and Flat. Upon defeating the ghostly form of Sharp in the graveyard, he has this to say: "All the people in this village are born to serve the royal family of Hyrule. We brothers also served the royal family, and were assigned to study the hereditary mystic powers of the family. Though we never could figure out the power of the Triforce, we had almost completed our study of controlling time with the tones of ocarinas. I mean, actually, we did complete that study. We would have been famous if that hateful Ganondorf had not tried to steal our results. We could never let him reap the fruits of our research. That's why we gave our lives to protect the secret." Here is where we first see mention of his thieving ways. Rather than earning what he wants, he'd rather take it, by force if necessary. The next way in which he tries to gain the keys to the Triforce is through coercion and careful plotting. He needs to obtain the 3 spiritual stones, which are the remaining keys needed to open the Door of Time. So he travels to the lands of the people who hold these stones and tries to convince their respective leaders to give them to him. At this point, he resorts to threats and bribery to get what he wants. He places a curse on the Great Deku Tree that causes it to become infested with monsters and wither away and die. He fills the Dodongo's cavern with an abundance of Dodongos, and also seals the entrance to the cavern, depriving the Gorons of their food source, telling them to give him the spiritual stone, and only then will he move the rock that blocks the entrance for them. Lastly, he poisons the guardian god of the Zora, Lord Jabu Jabu, and forges a letter to make it seem as if Princess Ruto wrote it, coaxing Link into going and saving her from inside of Lord Jabu Jabu, which he has filled with electric jellyfish and giant octoroks. Now here is where we first get to see the intelligence and cunning of Ganondorf. By committing these acts, he creates for himself 2 ways of obtaining the spiritual stones. By providing each race with a solution to a problem he has created, he can effectively bribe them into giving him the stones. Or, his other alternative is he can have someone collect them, like Link, by overcoming these obstacles and receiving the stones as a reward, and then using them along with the Ocarina of Time to open the door into the Sacred Realm where the Triforce is held. Either way, whether they give in to his demands or Link obtains the stones, he wins. Once Link has the stones in his possession, we can see Ganondorf chasing after a fleeing Princess Zelda, presumably to take the Ocarina of Time from her. However, before he can reach her, she throws the ocarina to Link, giving it to him so he can open the Door of Time and guard the Triforce from Ganondorf. Here, Ganondorf shows a bit of a humorous side, telling Link he likes him when he dares to stand up to him. However, this was all a part of Ganondorf's plan, and once the door opens and Link is sealed within, we get this quote from Ganondorf. "Excellent work. As I thought, you held the keys to the Door of Time. You have led me to the gates of the Sacred Realm. Yes, I owe it all to you, kid." Once we're taken into the future and Ganondorf has established himself as the evil king of all of Hyrule, we see the extent to which he will go to preserve his grip on power. He infests the forest with his minions and plants a phantom clone of himself in its temple to corrupt it and spread his will, subjugating the Kokiri. Before, he had tried to starve out the Gorons, but now he threatens to feed the Gorons to a massive dragon, effectively committing genocide against the Gorons as a warning to anyone who would oppose him. He freezes over the Zora domain, cutting them off from water, which is their life source. He has his surrogate mothers, Koume and Kotake, brainwash Nabooru into becoming his puppet to do his bidding. The lengths he will go to keep his hold on power have no limits. He'd seemingly wipe out the lives of many in order to rule over a few. As long as he rules, that is all that matters. The last lines of dialogue that are of any significance regarding his personality are said by himself and Zelda right after his defeat by the hands of Link, and after he has been sealed by the 6 sages. When Link strikes him down, he is shocked that someone so mighty and great as he considers himself to be was beaten by a kid. This shows his arrogance and overconfidence, misjudging Link and being too sure of himself, which leads to his downfall. After this, Zelda describes him as pitiful, for without having a strong and righteous mind, he was doomed to fail in his effort to control the power of the gods, once again showing his extreme hubris. After he is sealed by the 6 sages, he curses Zelda and Link, vowing one day that the seal would be broken, and he will then exterminate their descendants. This shows Ganondorf to not only be a vengeful man, but a sore loser as well. Overall, this game portrays Ganondorf as a ruthless, cunning, selfish, and power-hungry man whose aim is power above all else. Nothing matters more to him, not the many peoples of Hyrule, and not even his own kin. Only power. This is a man who, from the very moment he was born, was granted the title of king, and who also inherited the hatred of an ancient evil. All of these attributes, and what he is ultimately destined to be before he is even born, have molded him into the king of evil, and a man who, at least in this iteration, definitely deserves the title. All of these things combined give us a good idea of who Ganondorf is, but we still don't have the full picture. But we're getting there. And everything we've learned about Ganondorf from this game ties very well into the next game we'll be going over. Twilight Princess takes place roughly 100 years after Ocarina of Time. This game is in the same timeline as Ocarina of Time, and could, in a way, be presented as a direct sequel to it, as Ganondorf in this game is the same Ganondorf that appears in Ocarina of Time. After Ganondorf is defeated in Ocarina of Time, Link returns to the present and is able to warn Zelda and the royal family about Ganondorf's plot, after which Ganondorf is summarily executed by the sages, as seen in a cutscene in Twilight Princess. When a sword is thrust through his stomach, he is able to break free due to holding the Triforce of Power. The sages then seal him in the Twilight Realm to stop him from spreading his evil once again. Once in the Twilight Realm, he presents himself to Zant as a god and turns him into his faithful servant, who carries out his will and desire to once again return to Hyrule and rule over it. As Zant is the primary antagonist for most of the game, not much is mentioned of Ganondorf personally, other than Zant referring to him as his god. However, we are given one line of dialogue from the sages that shows us 2 key parts of his personality that he's carried over from Ocarina of Time: arrogance and overconfidence. In all of his fury and might, he was blind to any danger, and thus was exposed, subdued, and brought to justice. Believing himself to be above others, and a king with power unmatched by anyone else, he finds himself being defeated by Link in Ocarina of Time, not because of his superior strength, but mostly due to his inaction and feeling so secure in the thought that no one would be able to stop him. Had he reacted to Link sooner, his story may have ended in a much different way. When Link and Midna confront Ganondorf, he has this to say: "Your people have long amused me, Midna. To defy the gods with such petty magic, only to be cast aside? How very pathetic. Pathetic as they were, though, they served me well. Their anguish was my nourishment. Their hatred bled across the void and awakened me. I drew deep of it and grew strong again. Your people had some skill, to be sure, but they lacked true power. The kind of absolute power that those chosen by the gods wield. He who wields such power would make a suitable king for this world, don't you think? Where in Ocarina of Time we could only assume that he felt superiority over others. In Twilight Princess we hear it from the very mouth of Ganondorf himself. Between feeding off the emotions of the Twilight and using Zant as a puppet, we're given an even better image of Ganondorf as a master manipulator, and a man who holds an incredible amount of cunning. His immense pride is also shown, reveling in the power granted to him by the gods, confirming to him his belief that he should be the king of Hyrule. When he is defeated by Link, he shows his vengeful side as well, saying only this: "Do not think this ends here. The history of light and shadow will be written in blood." This echoes the words of Demise, who said something similar with his dying breath, and also laid a curse of hatred and misery upon Hyrule. Still as vengeful, prideful, and manipulative as ever, we find ourselves encountering this particular form of Ganondorf one last time. In Four Swords Adventure, we don't ever physically see Ganondorf in the game, but we do hear a lot about him from others. In this game, we get to see the worship he inspires in those that admire his power. The words of praise the Deku give him in this game are unlike any other he has received so far, save for maybe the Gerudo and other NPCs in Ocarina of Time referring to him as the Great Ganondorf, and Zant referring to him as his god. The Deku tell Link how much things have improved since Ganondorf arrived, and how much they adore him and everything he's doing. We can see here that he inspires his followers to do things for him not only out of a want for power, but because they genuinely believe he is doing the right things for them. Zant had a similar feeling in Twilight Princess before he came to know that Ganondorf was just using him. Vati is also being used to further Ganondorf's struggle for power, although we get no dialogue from Vati in this game to indicate he knows this. We learn from the Red Knight of Hyrule that Ganondorf sent Dark Link to undo the seal and release Vati, so Ganondorf could use him to obtain the power he desired. That, however, is Ganondorf's nature. He helps those around him, only when it suits his own goals, and then casts them aside like nothing. Everyone is a pawn to him, and only he is worthy. In this game, he steals a trident that houses an evil spirit inside of it, breaking the laws of his people, the Gerudo, and once again cementing him as a thief who will do anything to get what he wants. While technically there is more dialogue from Ganondorf in this game, this dialogue is actually given to us after he has taken the trident and transformed into Ganon. Therefore, we'll be leaving those lines for the next video. But what little we've learned from this game is still important, as we know that Ganondorf does possess a certain charisma that causes other beings to follow him, not out of fear or greed, but out of loyalty and admiration. We also get to see once again his thieving nature, and his willingness to use the power of others to further his own goals. This is the last time we see Ganondorf acting mostly in a similar manner to how he was portrayed in Ocarina of Time. Now, the last game we actually see Ganondorf in, within the current canon that is not the last game chronologically that was made with Ganondorf in it. However, while the previous 3 games we've covered had a Ganondorf in them that was very similar to the last, this incarnation of Ganondorf does retain some of the personality traits of the previous ones, but overall he is a much different character than who he was in those 3 games. And so, I've saved this title for last. The Ganondorf we encounter in Wind Waker is an anomaly as far as the character goes. He does a lot of the same things he does in the other games, corrupting people, cursing things, and generally being a blight upon the land of Hyrule and the Great Sea. However, the Ganondorf in this game is a far more sympathetic character than the one that we encounter in the previous games. All of the dialogue provided by other characters in this game relating to Ganondorf describe him as he has always been: evil, manipulative, terrifying, and powerful. But it's not what others say about him that matters here. It's what he says himself. In the beginning of the game, his character starts off much the same as it did in the previous games. Arrogant and sure of himself, he taunts Link, commending him for his reckless courage, calling him a foolish boy who can't possibly hope to defeat him, and even calling Tetra a pathetic little sea rat, showing that he is still the callous and cruel man he has always been, with a high sense of pride and superiority. Later on in the game, he also laughs at the notion that the peoples left behind by the goddesses after they flooded Hyrule would be able to awaken Hyrule once again. He refers to them as so many pathetic creatures, scattered across a handful of islands, drifting on this sea like fallen leaves on a forgotten pool. All of this is in character for Ganondorf, and expected from the King of Evil. But it's what happens next that truly adds something to the character we've never seen before or even considered up to this point. That Ganondorf, despite all of his evil deeds, his greed, his lust for power, has a heart. My country lay within a vast desert. When the sun rose into the sky, a burning wind punished my lands, searing the world. And when the moon climbed into the dark of night, a frigid gale pierced our homes. No matter when it came, the wind carried the same thing: death. But the winds that blew across the green fields of Hyrule brought something other than suffering and ruin. I coveted that wind, I suppose. It can only be called fate, that here I would again gather the three with the crests, that I should lay my hand on that which grants the wishes of the beholder, that when power, wisdom, and courage come together, the gods would have no choice but to come down. The power of the gods, the Triforce. He who touches it will have whatever he desires granted. After this speech, he then goes on to tell Link something astonishing. Do not fear. I will not kill you. I merely have need of the power that dwells within you. Could it really be that all this time, Ganondorf was searching for a better life, not only for him, but for his people? Did he feel despair as he watched his people struggle and die, while the people of Hyrule flourished and prospered? Is this the man he truly is? Hidden beneath all that hate, is there simply a man who desired a future for his people, but when he's faced with a destiny he cannot control, is only able to bring destruction and misery upon the world, whether he wants to or not? Perhaps. Perhaps this is who Ganondorf really is. Or is it all a front? A last-ditch attempt at gaining the power of the Triforce without a struggle? A lie told to Link to gain sympathy from him? Are these lines of dialogue simply another use of manipulation? Or could it be that after being sealed for so long, and once again being resurrected, he learned from his mistakes of only seeking power for himself, and sought to help those important to him? These notions could all be true. We'll never know for certain. However, I'd like to believe that he's matured in a sense over time, coming to grips with the immense power and hate he holds within him, and finding himself able to control it to a certain extent, so as not to lust after power so greedily as he had before. Before being defeated once again by the hero of time and turning to stone, he manages a few last words as he takes his final breath. The wind. It is blowing. So here we have it. Every game that Ganondorf has canonically appeared in so far. In Ocarina of Time, we meet a man who is consumed by greed, hatred, and a lust for power. A man willing to end countless lives and destroy and scar the world in order to achieve his goal of ultimate power. A prideful and arrogant man who looks down upon all who are not him. As to himself, there is no one greater than he. And perhaps a jealous man as well. A king in his own right, he yearns to control that which is not his, never to be content with all that he holds himself. In Twilight Princess, we see much of the same man. Cunning and manipulative, he is able to convince another to do his bidding, as he presents himself to him as a god, who can give him what he desires most. A ruthless and brutal man who would warp and enslave an entire tribe of people to command and sacrifice them to shroud the land in darkness and rule over it. In Four Swords Adventure, we find the same manipulation, as he commands another puppet to do his bidding and satiate his desires. And also a thief who will resort to anything in order to achieve his goals. And last, but certainly not least, in The Wind Waker, at the end, we come to see Ganondorf not as the king of evil, but as a human being, one who looked far off into the distance at a land full of life and hope as he stood surrounded by death and suffering. Finding deep within him the burning hate that he is doomed to hold for all eternity, and seeing no other option than to give in to it. Destined to be king by birth, and doomed to evil by fate, perhaps this is all out of his control. Prideful, arrogant, cruel, cunning, cold, calculating, manipulative, hateful, thieving, jealous, sorrowful. From the details we've obtained from these games, we can confirm that these are the traits that make up the personality of Ganondorf. The ultimate power that he craves, the ancient hatred and power that he holds within him, and all of these traits go hand in hand in molding and twisting him into something he's always destined to become in the end. The pure incarnation of evil, the great demon and prince of darkness, Ganon. With everything we've learned in this video, we can easily transition into our next entry in the series, where we'll be going over all the details of Ganon, the final product of the curse of hatred laid upon Hyrule by Demise. I hope you enjoyed part 2 of this episode and this analysis of Ganondorf. If I missed anything, feel free to let me know in the comments below, and let me know what you think of Ganondorf as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.